refer to. There I am, and I can share. Hooray! Great. Thanks for sorting that out in the background. I really appreciate it. And let's find a window, and let's find the window and share. Great. Hopefully you can see a very colourful image and redesigning thinking. Thank you for your patience. I'm going to zip straight into the presentation because we lost a few minutes already. We can see it. Thank you, Dominic. That's great. As I was explaining earlier on, this talk is called Redesigning Thinking because it does refer to a book where I've mapped out everything I've tried to do in service design over the last 10 to 15 years. And I was explaining to everyone a little bit about my background, work for people like IDEO and my own company, Tangerine. I don't need to repeat that. I now run training company, helping all sorts of organizations understand the tools of design, including people like the Bank of England and fire brigades and public and commercial organizations. And I love it. It's what I do. And I really enjoy taking people on that journey and seeing how design solves their problems. So as I was mentioning, I wrote a book 25 years ago. One of my students then said, you better write another one, Clive. This was about design process that wasn't really talked about so much then, and it was an example of 20 different designers and how they design different types of products, including the rather wonderful Sony Aabo robot dog. And so this recent book that was published a couple of months ago looks at service design rather than product design methodology, and reflects my experience of practicing and teaching service design to students and of course organizations. And as I was saying just then, I reflected that the first thing I put on the back was the world doesn't work. And I think for me, the world does not yet work well enough. And there's still a long way to go to make it work and be accessible and inclusive for everybody. And that's one of the arguments of the book. The book's divided into several chapters, and you don't need to buy the book, by the way, because you're going to get it all here. I'm going to zip through just an overview of what each chapter is about to help you understand what I think service design can do for us. Whenever I've been in the position of applying service design to organizations of many descriptions, and if you look at the theories, for example, of change management in MBA courses, the burning platform is a key issue, understanding why change is needed. And I rather loved the artist Jenny Holz's comment, you live the surprise results of old plans. And I suspect that many of us feel that is the case, especially if we're in government or in policy or in an organization trying to make change. There's legacy systems and stuff that we haven't really got control of. But to understand that we need to change is to also understand what services are. And services are all around us. They're so big, sometimes we don't see them. They have consequences. Services arrive during, for example, periods of lockdown that become very valuable. But they have a lot of consequences. Our streets are now full of people driving e-bikes and motorbikes around, and lots of different types of delivery of service. They have consequences we didn't necessarily predict, but we've always had services, and strangely we've used products as perhaps not strangely, it's been more tangible to see the portals to those services. So a telephone box was the visible, tangible interaction with an incredible network that would allow us to speak to people, and of course the letter boxes allows us to send a message to an invisible and transparent service that would involve trains and people sorting things out and the letter arriving in Edinburgh or London the next day. But we saw services as physical points of interaction, which of course have now been entirely replaced by our phone. You know, we speak to people on our phone, it's in our pocket now, and we WhatsApp and we email, and we hardly ever send letters. I imagine that's true for all of us. Government, of course, has been right at the heart of delivering services. It delivers lots of useful stuff, from a passport to a driving license. And of course, the revolution that's happened over the last 10 or 15 years in how government delivers services digitally, and the incredible, and I still think one of the best examples of design there is in the world anywhere, that government digital services did to convert all those departmental websites to come up with one experience, to one gov.uk point of contact. And it's possibly the piece of design that's had the most impact on the most people's lives, certainly in the UK to this day. And when at the last election, there was a podcast by the Private Eye team saying, Well, we have to give politicians credit for some things. Look at all these wonderful new digital systems. We don't have perforated licenses on our cars anymore, car tax licenses, I mean. And I was shouting at the at the smart speaker. It was designers. Now, of course, it was a political decision to do that, but it was an incredible force of designers. Some of you may have played a role in that, or at least would have heard of it, to redesign the way we interact with government, a new service design, UX, of course, but have a bigger concept of how we can deliver service. And if only we could do the same thing to the health service. I'm sure many people have asked, but that health service from birth to literally the end of life, and the army of people involved, from, yes, of course, doctors and nurses and surgeons and ambulance drivers and porters, and incredible amount of humanity that is there to deliver these huge services that impact our lives. And sometimes services with the best of intentions don't always go well. You know, the littering of our pavements by bike rental services, and the eventual decision by some local authorities to ask you to put it in a certain place, but very much post the issue. Well-meaning, environmentally conscious services where we haven't considered the consequences have a very negative impact on our lives, and sometimes they're just irritating consequences. For how many times have I tried to sign up to find out I had a login and I can't find my password? I spend a significant amount of every day sorting this stuff out, right? Even though the technology works, and sometimes technology doesn't work and it has serious damage, and you may not, or you may recognize this rather innocuous terminal as the Post Office Horizon terminal. And we know the scandal of that, of the consequences of poor design, of the design of a political response to that, or a business response. We can do serious damage if we don't understand the consequences of the decisions we're making. And some of you may well remember the world-class track and trace system. And when services don't work, the consequences can be really serious, more serious than your vacuum cleaner breaking down or your power drill breaking down. When a world-class service is promised, and the components of that service with Apple and Android and technology put in place, but the design of it, the way the messages are received, were received by the public, they thought they were being scammed, the people delivering the service weren't trained and left untended and wandered back to university. It was a £37 billion failure because it wasn't designed properly. So we have to take design seriously, and it's not just design of the human interaction, it's design of the organization. The pandemic preparedness and response structures in the UK and England, August 2019, just prior to the pandemic, were not well designed. And how on earth were you going to make a rapid response? So we're not just talking about human interfaces here, we're talking about our whole approach to decision making and our own agency to make better decisions. Now, if we're talking about design, we're talking about change. We want to change things to be better, and change is happening all around us. And usually when we have a burning platform, it's already too late. So being proactive about understanding change is something I think is really essential for us all. And Jack Welch, the famous old CEO of American fame, said, "Change before you have to," of GE. And IBM, for example, understood change way before it happened, when this computer company was making computers that were mainframes with whizzing tape drives that fed terminals. And they realized that computing and the miniaturization of technology meant that a computer could sit on our desk and even in our home. They realized they had to change. So they rebranded themselves. It literally is a brand, isn't it? The sort of thing you'd put on a cow, IBM. And Tom Watson, the CEO at the time, said, good design is good business. Fantastic. Okay, he got it. He absolutely got it. So he asked his engineering team to create the personal computer to match his brand aspirations, to match this new consumer world away from science and military use of computing. And he gave them 12 months. And therefore, they looked at how they could create a personal computer in 12 months. And they chose the fastest and most effective manufacturing techniques that were sheet metal. They were going to make the first personal computer keyboard in sheet metal. And this is not the design, but it's very similar. It's folded metal. It's got rivets. It really did have rivets. It's sharp on the edges and the corners. It looks like a hobbyist, looks like something you'd have in a military vehicle. But what they didn't counter for was the design manager at IBM, Tom Hardy, who told me this story years ago, and I love it so much, I put it in the book. He was the design manager, and he said, no. He said, no, thou shalt not pass. He said, this does not reflect what the customer will associate with this brand. This does not reflect the ability to put technology on our desktops and tables. We must do something different. He found a new process, polyurethane molded plastic, low tooling cost, can do it within 12 months. Sent it to engineering. They said, no, we prefer our trusted solution. How many times have we heard that in our lives? He said, no, no, no. Okay, I'm going to the top person. I'm going to go to the CEO and show him the difference. He showed him the design, polyurethane, soft-edged keyboards, polyurethane on the front, a nice place to put your brand new logo you spent millions of dollars on. Now we have something that can sit on your office or home desk. I sometimes wonder, had IBM really created a sheet metal personal computer, whether the computer revolution would have really happened? Something to discuss later. And he won a design award. But change is happening right now. It's happening all the time. The challenges are there, and we have to think ahead rather than react. Will we ever see a doctor again? Will we ever see a financial advisor again? Will it be digital interfaces? Every child that goes to hospital has its DNA taken, and it's massively driving successful scientific research and innovation in disease. But that's data that's sitting somewhere. Can we design that to be usable in other ways? Can we do stuff with that? We have to understand our aging populations. We are designing for very different demographics than we were even 20 or 30 years ago. I spent a lot of last year in China, where coming up to 300 million people are over 65 years old. The government has to understand that. Business and government are very aware of the reality of climate change, but it's not just awareness. It's not an argument anymore. It's legislation. If you are a manufacturing company, you have end producer responsibility, regardless of whether in the EU or not. We're all part of global supply chains, and this is a legislative factor in any company's strategy, not just a nice discussion to have. And beyond that, consumer care perhaps around sustainability too, but also the provenance. Where does my quinoa come from? Right? Does it come from a hill farm in Peru or a factory in Bolivia? Where does my palm oil in my margarine come from? Is it a rainforest? These things are becoming important, and we can communicate them in the way through data and the way we influence the world around us. And with that comes the rise of purpose-led companies, of which there are an increasing number. My favorite, and I'm sure yours too, is Tony Chocolonely. As they say when you unwrap your chocolate bar, this is an impact company that makes chocolate, not the other way around. They are dedicated to removing child labor from the supply chain of cocoa in the various parts of the world, who export that raw commodity. And we are taking control of the purpose of companies. Increasingly, society, communities have purpose. We need to understand this as we design the world. And of course, when we do design services, and it's important that people who are new to this understand, we're not fantasists. Design is not just imagining how the world should be. We have to understand financial viability. That's true in government as much as in a business. Can we afford to do things? Is this a viable business model? Can we make things? Do we have the organizational capability? Does the technology work if we're using technology? And do people want it? Can they accept it? Do they understand it like they didn't in the track and trace system? Can we make things that really fit people's desires and needs? And what's interesting, and I explore this a little bit in the book Redesigning, thinking that has moved on, has become a sense of maturity around that our businesses are increasingly, they need to understand environmental sustainability. If your chips are going to, electronic chips are going to rise 5,000% because there are floods in Taiwan, that's impacts your business. is technology, what are you doing with your data? Is it secure? Are we being responsible and human centered? And of course, are we not just user focused but aware of the social benefits of what we do? And that's increasingly important. And I worked with government on the design of electric vehicles, for example, electric vehicle charging points on our streets. And we have to think as much about the people who didn't have electric vehicles, people who didn't have cars. It's not just a user, there's a broader picture. And we need to balance all these things through the act of design. The solution for so many things tends to be technology. And as I mentioned, my chapter on technology is the longest because it's become very important. I love Roy Amara's quote, we tend to overestimate the effect of technology in the short run and underestimate the effect in the long run. And that reflects our excitement with different types of technology, and then our sort of relaxation until the real impact hits us when we're least expecting it. And yet we've been living with technology for quite a long time, and yet it still doesn't really work. You know, I'm plagued by the blinking ovens of the world. Whenever I go, I see oven clocks flashing because people haven't been able to change them since the last clock change. And you think, wow, and I know very well that I can't change the clock. It doesn't behave in the way the menu tells me it does on my operating manual. I have to shut down all the electricity in the house, restart it, and then it does appear to allow me to change the time. I then have to do this all around the house, then with my parents, and then with my parents-in-law. I lose a day when the hours change an hour. How can we, in this age of AI, be so hopeless that we humans can't design technology to allow us to change the clocks on our cookers and our microwaves? And we provide way too many features that nobody uses at all. I'm sure familiar to everyone. And my wife gives me a terrible time about the pile of remote controls in our front room, and she thinks it's my fault because I'm a designer. But I can see design doing amazing things to help us be more inclusive and accessible. I was delighted to discover on the iPhone the ability to turn it into an incredibly accessible, simple product for my mother who has Alzheimer's, and it becomes her lifeline, and she's not confused anymore, and she can do it. We can design it right when we have a will to do so, but technology on its own is very likely to solve lots of problems we don't have, like what was the Segway solving with all its technology? And as somebody wittily pointed out, you could have put a caster on the front and you wouldn't have needed all that gyroscopic mechanism. And of course, now it's been replaced by, well, these. And as I said at the beginning, they have a different consequence. They're littering our streets and causing accidents and unintended consequences. Google Glasses, when it first came out, a total and utter failure with a huge amount of money, shoving it out into the world and hoping we're going to use it. I personally found that intrusion on my own privacy of somebody wearing a camera really beyond the pale, and that kind of destroyed the idea. Until now, Ray-Ban have put cameras back in their sunglasses, and just today announced they're going to have a heads-up display on their sunglasses. I'm not sure how I feel about people walking down a beach in sunglasses that have cameras in them. I don't know how you feel about that. And trust is such a big part of technology that we sometimes fail to understand. So excited are we by the capabilities of technology. My wife won't have this in the house because she thinks it's listening. And my parents, they love it because they can say, play classical music or Leonard Cohen, and it does all day. And but when they were having a little play fight and my dad said, stop it, wife, you're killing me, up it popped. Do you want us to call the police? So it is listening. Don't doubt it. Right? Of course, with AI, we have so many new opportunities. But again, how do we design these opportunities? Is AI just a chatbot? A friend was telling me they went to a huge exhibition of AI the other day, and it was chatbot after chatbot. Really? And yet we see people designing it. This was an travel insurance company who realized that in people claiming for their travel, they can actually create a completely holistic experience using AI, creating a whole new level of service excellence. That interests me a lot more. And even in government, my business partner, Anya Kluver, previously spent time in the Foreign and Commonwealth Office designing how AI can have an impact on government. And that mission was to make some tangible operational, but also customer based improvements on that experience, and it doesn't look much, but the impact has been huge. It over hit the target on reduced phone calls, hit the target on written inquiries, and more than that, really help people in trouble when they need to contact the Foreign Office in foreign lands. And that impact is being found again and again, but combining design and AI as we go forward. I associate design with decision making. I think that everybody who makes decisions can benefit from design, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. But it is amazing to me how bad we are at changing the way we make decisions. We may use the same tools, the same methods all the time. And as Cicero said, you have to be an idiot to keep persisting in that error. It's a small example, and I feel very sorry for them, but Believe Housing are a fantastic social housing group who took over a lot of council properties and wanted to go on that journey to carbon zero. So they gave everybody a heat pump. What they hadn't understood was that massively increased the electricity bill 2.5 times for the residents of their houses. It meant that they were making choices between food and fuel, as our students at the RCA found out. So they had to take them all out and replace them. That was expensive. We need to really understand the cultural changes of moving to different heating, the way people are used to the old ways, and bring them on journeys. We have to understand the consequences of our decisions. And a lot of times it's because we look at things as processes. And this was a process for onboarding wealthy people to a service. And the data showed them it was taking 6 months. And when we did what designers do, they couldn't find out why. They didn't see why. So we did what designers do, and we visualized that process. And every one of those red Post-it notes is an insurmountable barrier, right? They didn't know that. They hadn't gone through that experience. And when we showed them that, they realized that their decisions made for good reason, good intention, compliance and regulation, they could redesign those decisions to make this process work, because it wasn't a process. It was an experience. People were doing things, having to find information. We need to work out what the experience is, not just the process, which brings me to design. I've done all this without really mentioning design. Design is something that people have perceptions of. And for me, it's still true. And maybe for some of you who are in the design world, the perception that design is a luxury item. It is about designing handbags. It's still very, very prevalent. People are amazed when I talk about how we use design in the way that I'm talking about here. And when you Google designers, these are all fashion designers, and the list is much longer than that. Not even Johnny Ive is up there. And then when you go to your WhatsApp or your text messenger and you type in designer and you get, two little painters, right? This does not help me when I'm talking about how we have to redesign systems, strategies, and policies. We need an improved emoji. Please, somebody design it. But when I was at the Design Council, a very long time ago, over 20 years now, we were working with developing tools that help people understand design as a process, a methodology, not just a way to design a handbag, something that everyone was involved with. And after I left, my successor, Richard Eiserman, asked the team that I'd put together to create some way of answering that question, what is design? And could you draw it on a napkin? And here's Chris Vanstone drawing it on a napkin. We came up with something that might be very familiar to you, might be completely new to you. And some of you, might love it and some of you might hate it. But I find it still a very essential component in understanding what design is. And it came from research where people said, we had a problem, customer or something, and we were clever. We saw the solution, so we built the solution, and then we found out it didn't suit the customer, and it actually wasn't the real problem. That wasn't the problem. If only we had invested a bit of time to understand the problem first. And that's all the Double Diamond is, as well as reminding you that there are different states of mind. That when we need to discover who are we designing for, what are the problems, why are those problems happening, we need to think very divergently. We need to think broadly, look at lots of things. Don't make assumptions, don't assume anything, find out. And then we need to analyze and frame that problem. And then we can come down, we can converge on our thinking to a point where we truly understand, right, we did all that broad thinking and now we can focus. Now we can do what you'd expect designers to do, create ideas and prototype them and validate them before we build it. Imagine that. My world is absolutely full of technology companies who rush through techniques such as Agile on assumptions they've made to solutions they think will work, and deliver things that people don't want, and requires 6 months, 6 developers full time to re-engineer what they've made. What a massive waste of money. I see this every day of my life, people realizing they've made that mistake. If you invest in understanding the problem, understanding who for, design it before you press the developing button, you deliver things of value, you de-risk what you're doing. And it's true in any walk of industry, whether it's technology or product or services or just working in a library. Work it out before you jump to a solution, because solutions can be very expensive and are nearly always wrong unless you understand the problem you're solving. AI is helping us now with this model, and you can see it can be more diamonds than two. But this idea that we discover and define, AI is helping us do that. It's helping us remove bias, actually. It's helping us prototype and understand. It's helping us streamline our processes to make sure we can deliver. Design and AI working together is absolutely the future. But design starts with people. I worked with a local authority in Holland who wanted to deliver services to an aging population, but they didn't know who they were. So we started Googling who were the old people in the town of Elmira. Well, there was clearly the local drug dealer. It is legal in Holland. Here's the guy on a dating site in his 80s. Good for him. Here are people demonstrating about their local nature to retain it. This person is laughing, not dying. These people are using technology in a community center, and this person has mobility problems. This was our way of going out there, talking to these people and understanding their problems before we designed. And we asked questions. What are people doing? Well, my favorite, what are they doing, is this story given to me by Jeremy Myerson, the head of at the time of the Helen Hamlin Foundation into inclusivity and age and disability and neurodiversity. Now, they were asked to explore the potential for Terminal 5, the design of Terminal 5 at Heathrow. One of the forecasts was older people would be traveling healthier and wealthier. So they followed old people around. They quickly found they were going into the toilets. So, okay, that's fine. We need more toilets. But these being design researchers, they went into the toilets and they saw older people were standing around in the toilets. So they did something strange. They went up and said, "What are you doing?" And these old people said, "Well, we're in here because we're very anxious about our flights and we can't hear the announcements out there because it's too noisy and there's music and people. So we come into the toilet so we can hear when our flights are called." Ah, you say, that's right. Okay, now we understand. That's the insight we needed. Now we can give them seating and signage and audio away from retail and remove that anxiety of missing your flight. At which juncture, I always say, we have to get into the toilets of life. We have to go further than we think is reasonable to find out what people are really doing, find those insights they can't even necessarily tell us about, because there lies innovation, there lies solutions that really work. And this is a central part of what we do in service design, and it continues to fascinate me. And this is born of empathy. Design is about empathy. It's not about self-promotion or self-creation or artistic endeavor. It's about trying to design the world for others. And the most essential ingredient for that is empathy. My first boss, Bill Moggeridge, who designed the world's first laptop, funnily enough, said to me a long time ago, few people think about it, but there's nothing made by human beings that does not involve a design decision. And I found that a very important statement that later on in life, I discovered Herbert Simon, the Nobel Prize winning economist, who said, everyone designs, who devises courses of action to change existing situations into preferred ones. And when you put that through ChatGPT a couple of times, it says anyone who plans to improve things by changing them is a designer. We are using design techniques to make the world better. We're trying to improve things. Therefore, you are all designers. Okay. Now, I know the designers will get upset about that, but we all play a role in design. And we need to understand these tools of design to make better decisions, to help people who are designers do their job better. And the way we do this is we frame our problems. And understanding what a problem really is and not specifying the solution is a key part of the design process. And I was walking around Normandy a year or so ago after the wonderful celebrations of the D-Day landings there, and I found this in the museum from Winston Churchill. And for me, it's the perfect brief. Piers for use on beaches, they must float up and down. The anchor problem must be mastered. Let us have the best solution. Don't argue the matter. The difficulties will argue themselves. I love this, as I wish every brief was like this. It didn't tell you what to do. It said what the problem is, and now go and solve it. And that's such an important part. One of my favorite solutions to a problem was the French post office that observed that people were receiving their packages, going home, and then returning their packages. And they realized they were buying fashion. They were buying fashion in 3 sizes, small, medium, and large, going home, trying it on, returning the other 2. So their solution was put a changing room in the post office so they don't have to go home, waste all that travel cost and time and carbon. Do it in the post office. I absolutely love that ability to spot something, see what the problem is, and solve it. I talk about creativity a lot because I think we have lots of perceptions of creativity, and perhaps we think it's a luxury. I was delighted that the World Economic Forum put it at number 4 in its Future of Jobs report, way above AI and big data, which is very interesting. And these are the heads of organizations, commercial and public sector, talking about what are the skills they need. And I think this is a really important point. We need to have people, whether they're designers, everybody can have an idea. Can we learn how to express them, stop our repression? Which, as Bruce Lee said, we have to surrender to creativity and allow our ideas to flow to solve some of the problems in the world. And goodness me, there are enough of them. Let's spend some time being creative. And when we come up with ideas, we can prototype it. We need to see it and feel it. This is a prototype. It's a Post-it on a phone. It allows you to remove that Post-it and put the next one on. And you can show that to somebody and say, what do you think? What do you expect to happen next? These are really powerful tools in design, in service design. And finally, when we've done that, we need to be able to tell stories. And for me, I think storytelling is the output of so much design, but we put it in human terms. This is a story of Department of Work and Pensions project on creating a data platform for all our pensions. We, on average, have 11, and we, on average, lose 3. That's quite important if we want to retire for everybody. So this is a story that says how we might find, how a human citizen might find a service that we create on a poster, access that service, and work out that he, in this case, can go fishing, okay, and retire happily. This is an important way of communicating to our stakeholders, to government ministers, to business executives and managers, and to our customers and citizens. And once everyone's signed up for that, once we know it's right, then we can engineer it. Then we can create the tools that say, here is that experience at the top. Now let's align everything we do in our organization, the systems, the front end and back end, as we call it, to deliver on that promise that we now know works. We've de-risked because we've designed it and tested it. But even then, even with such powerful tools as blueprints, that's only the start. It's only the map. We still have to go on the journey. Raymond Turner said this very contentious issue to designers a while ago, and it is too important to be left to designers because we need everybody. We need department heads, policymakers, engineers of physical and software. We need everyone to make design actually happen. It's not just a designer's premise. And when we do that, it has impact. And I love to tell the story of Jude Armani, who was a student at the RCA, who answered a project from the Minister of Justice to see if we could keep prisoners out of prison after they've left prison, 65% recidivism rate. He did that by talking to prisoners, by volunteering. He found out they had musical talent. So he used his previous career in the recording industry to set up a record company called In-House Records, run by ex-prisoners, that releases recordings. We went to Latitude Festival a couple of years ago with the graduates from his course. 6,000 and counting prisoners have gone through this course, and recidivism rate of those people is now 0.5%, not 65%. This stuff works, and we measure it in numbers, and it has impact. Nothing is easy, of course. I work with organizations such as Bosch, and I mentioned I work with public sector bodies and you in government. We know it's not easy. What is strategy in business is policy in government. Companies like Bosch, they used maturity levels. And 20 years ago, the company Nielsen created a maturity index that said, do you care about your users? And level 1 was hostility. And they said it would take decades to put that right. And at the end, we get companies completely driven. And these are all the levels on the way up. And Bosch now are completely have at the center of their strategy human-centered design, properly designed digital journeys, AI for the benefit of us, not them, and designing for inclusivity and social change. Some really interesting changes because they went through that maturity step themselves. And in government, the Policy Lab created some incredibly useful tools that look at how do you make interventions and what are the ways, what are the levers for change. I'm obviously going super fast on this talk, and I really want to finish in the next couple of minutes, so excuse me going through these very fast, but I hope it gives you an introduction to how design is appropriate and relevant. I call the book Redesign Thinking because of something Lord Bird, John Bird, the founder of The Big Issue, said. We have two versions of this, but I really like the idea that it wasn't just rethinking how we think. It was not even, as he had called it, reinventing thinking. It's actually redesigning thinking. We need to think differently. And I think redesigning thinking is the right way to think about it. And of course, it is a pun on designing thinking. My version is that he'd been talking about reinventing thinking for policy making in his role as a Lord, and with particular care of social equity. And he said redesigning thinking. His story is that I asked him what would he redesign, and he said thinking. So either way, I think we're both right. But I love it as an expression of what we're trying to do here. And the final chapter in the book is about the future. I worked for Orange. That at one time, the English language's most famous saying, the future's bright. And whilst that was the Royal College, I interviewed Jeff Mulgan, very instrumental in creation of the Cabinet Office and policy over the years, a tremendous advocate for sustainability and zero carbon. And he recently wrote a book called Another World is Possible about why we've forgotten to think about the future. The future seems messy and uncertain. But we've often had dystopian views of the future, but we need to design a vision for our future. And as he put it, when the wind of change blows, some build walls whilst others build windmills. It's a famous Chinese proverb. And those are two different design strategies for the wind of change blowing. And I think that's really, really important for us to embrace that responsibility in design. I've talked to my students a lot and at the college about the qualities of service design. I think the first three are the most important: the curiosity to go and find out what's going on, the courage to tell people, and the spirit of collaboration to put it right. My students at service design at the RCA had fantastic visualizations of how to bring whole supply chains into the receipt of a fashion garment. They envision stuff. The last couple of years, I've used designers to envision how we can make products and services that help us be more tolerant and more empathetic to each other in society. A bench that helps you talk to people, an AI program that measures your social media and email and gives you a score on how nice you are. How do we interact with each other publicly, whether you're in Gaza or Tel Aviv? Massive and even tiny experiments and how design can help us change. In conclusion, I go back to Herman Simon, who said another thing that isn't so often quoted, and he talks about the intellectual activity that produces material artifacts. In his case, he was thinking products and objects, but now we think of services and digital interactions. But he's saying that intellectual activity is no different from the one that prescribes remedies for a sick patient to one that devises a new sales plan or a social welfare policy for a state. I could not have ever said it better myself. I end with recognition that enormous change is happening, whether it's technology, with OpenAI, Johnny Ive now designing a whole new plethora of objects that we will interact with. Let's all of us raise our ambition and reach higher and redesign our thinking to take better actions now and every day for the future. Thank you very much for listening to me. I tried to go through that as fast as I could, but there's a little bit of time left, and I'm happy to hang around after if you want to for any questions at all. I don't know we have a chat. Right, I've just seen the chat. Thanks.
Sorry, Clive, I am back, and thank
Good.
you so much for that brilliant talk. That was fantastic. So round of applause for Clive once again.
Thank you very much.
But yes,
to
we
you,
do
to you for
have
listening.
some lots of claps all round. Yeah, that was fantastic. Thanks so much. If anyone wants to just come off mute and put on camera, that would be great. And ask Clive any questions that you might have. If not, we can go to the chat.
I have to believe Jeff Morgan when he told me it was a Chinese proverb to answer that question. And the app that whilst you're brave enough to ask me a question, the app was a visualization working with Visa. It's actually about having an RFID and blockchain validated supply chain that allows you to put that information. And if you don't have that information, you look really bad when the fields are empty. So there's a lot of behavioral nudging there for customers to say, oh, this brand cares and this brand doesn't. In a nutshell, that's what that was.
Clive, hi, good afternoon.
Hello.
David here, amazing presentation. My question earlier on, and I loved the speed of your presentation. My mind was galloping to catch up with you.
Sorry.
Who benefits from increasing complexity, and who bears the costs?
Who benefits from increasing complexity? I think, well, nobody. but the world is complex, and service design is about the complexity that you have to acknowledge is there, and try and design it to be simple at the top. It's a classic swan metaphor, I guess. But when we look at something like a blueprint, for example, a very popular tool in service design, there's a lot of complexity there, but it's not like it's not there before we envisaged it. It's always there, and trying to acknowledge where it is, acknowledge where there are things we don't need. I heard a great story the other day of somebody in a government department had spent 20 years sending a fax to somebody who then immediately put it in the bin because it wasn't needed anymore. There's a lot of that in government and public sector and business. So embracing complexity to understand how we can simplify it, I think, is my very high level simplistic answer to you. But complexity is always there. We need to understand it and understand what it brings value and what doesn't, and then perhaps we can decomplicate our world a little bit. I hope that's an adequate answer.
What came to mind is the microwave. Sometimes we just want on and off, but sometimes there's a supply chain that benefits from adding complexity because they sell more components or more material.
Oh, absolutely agree. But also, I mean, marketing people love features. and battling with them to say, actually, we really don't need that. And of course, it massively reduces cost if you simplify things. So, but your theory might be true. I'm not sure.
Thank you.
Great stuff. Anyone else with any questions? Or
yeah,
I was the chat.
Happy to ask a question. Hi, Clive. Nice to see
Hello.
you.
Oh, Rob, hi.
So really interested in your kind of talk about purpose-led innovation. Really kind of on board for that, and kind of really inspired by the work from Tony Chocolonely, Impact First, and just using the kind of the chocolate bar to make it viable, which is great. And I love the idea that design is too important to be left to designers alone, because there are so many kind of different disciplines that we need to work with. I think with that in mind, I'm wondering how this all sits with mission-led innovation and the work that Mariana Mazzucato is doing. It seems to work really well.
Yeah, no, I think it's one and the same. It's just how you describe your mission, I guess, being a little bit simplistic. But what I would say is that I'm amazed every day at how much more purpose-led business there is. Sometimes in the obvious sectors, we mentioned Tony Chocolonely, but I went to the Blue Earth Summit last year and I thought I was going to meet a lot of tree huggers. I met a lot of really serious investors and entrepreneurs who were running real businesses and wanted success, and were integrating sustainability rather than slapping it on the top. And I think that sort of subtlety of purpose-led businesses, and I spend a lot of time asking businesses, what is your purpose? And that's usually quite a revealing question that they haven't spent any time asking. and I think it's a great sort of in. And I do believe that some of these techniques and tools that we're talking about will help people actually deliver purpose, deliver the impact, whatever it is. I mean, it can be profit. Of course it can be. Of course it can be. And it often is. You want to pay people, but if you can make profit and have purpose, that feels to me where a lot of businesses and organizations are going. I hope that.
Thank you.
It satisfies you. I tell you what, we should talk about that again another day.
Happily, Clive. Yeah, I think there's not enough time for me to go through this now, but I'd love to pick that up
let's
again.
catch up. Yeah. Good.
Thanks, Rob. I believe we have Sandeep with his hand up next.
Hello, Sandeep.
Hi, Clive. Thank you. That was a really, really excellent presentation. I used to work at the Treasury, so with that hat on, I was wondering, is there a limit or ceiling to the complexity or scale that we can apply design thinking principles to? Like, for example, like how to grow the economy is like a hard question. It's very difficult to prototype taxes. Are there some problems that just don't fit within the model of design thinking, or are we just not looking at those problems in the right way?
Oh goodness me! I mean, I have to be humble about design, and that's where sometimes people criticize design, that we say we can solve everything. But I think we can. I think we have some tools that can help solve lots of things. You say you can't prototype taxis. I bet you we can. I'll come and help you do that. But there's a huge amount of work with people like the Policy Lab, very much at the front end, just to help make the people who will have to make those decisions and design those and make very difficult decisions to be much more aware perhaps of the impact on normal people, for example. And before you put the policy into work. So I think there's loads of stuff that you can do to reduce the risk of unintended consequences or poor impacts. And I think we just have to sit down and work out what that is on a case-by-case basis. But I think people are designing when they make decisions, and if we begin to understand that better, then we can look to see how these tools can help. And that's not, when you're designing a product, you want everyone to love it. When you're designing a policy, not everyone's going to love it for sure. So it's very, very complex. But I think I'd love to. I think we should hold a design jam or something where we take something really, really difficult and see if we can help design it. And I'm sure it's going on in service design all over government and in the Policy Lab now.
Thanks,
So be optimistic. Be optimistic, I would say to you, Sandeep.
Great stuff. I think we have time for one more question.
Sure.
Yeah, go for it, Dominic.
Great. I'm glad I can ask it. My question comes to the language of design, maybe touching on what you just said about the overpromise. To what extent would you advise that we leave the language of design behind and sort of embracing empathy and just showing, not telling, by trying to bring it in the language of what others, using the language of what other people are doing? Or is there value in sort of applying service design value, like service design methods, or is there value in naming service design and having people have that moment in change? So rather than sneaking it in and using the methods, having a company actually make that decision to say, no, now we're going to do service design.
Oh man, this is a big question.
Yeah, my apologize. It's not.
No, it's a fantastic question. And I flip-flop. I've come down on the side of saying design because I think design is a very human activity.
Yeah.
You know, my 3-hour-long lecture will go back to Greek vases. You know, and why did they bother to make them beautiful? And why did they put stories on them? You know, they were designing. You know, but unfortunately, the perception is so bad. You know, so I've chosen to try and improve people's perceptions of what design is. But I absolutely agree that we have to do it by stealth. Judah Armani, for example, the prison in-house records guy, would say he doesn't talk about design, he talks about education. And sometimes we have to wear camouflage, and I don't mind that. But I think at a certain point you have to come out the Trojan horse and say, actually what you're doing is designing stuff better, and let's help change that perception of design. But it is a constant problem I have, that they think we're handbag designers. So I think we do whatever, we get in every Trojan horse, we do whatever, we use guile, we use language, change it if we need to, but do it.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Great stuff. I believe I have one more hand up. I don't know, Clive, if you have time for
I'm happy to. Absolutely. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. So yes.
Amazing. Go for it, Stuart.
Yeah, Stuart Bolton, DFE. So I think I just leads on from the last two questions, which is sort of always in these things, there's a string elements like leadership and trust, and
Yes.
and thinking about, taking design thinking into government policy design. How do we develop the trust of leaders, of politicians, of ministers making those decisions to sort of use that process approach?
Yeah, well, I mean, I got some example. I mean, I worked at a bank. Nobody wanted to use the word design at a bank unless it was designing the app. And so what I did was I looked for the burning platforms. I looked for the most complained thing at the bank I was with, and I went and solved it using their techniques. I didn't tell them that I was using these techniques, but they saw impact. And then there was a queue at my door, and they said, "Okay, well, by the way, these are design techniques, so I'm now going to come and do them for you." So again, I guess I'm doing what I was advising the previous questioner to go and solve something and show that it works. I don't believe that you should put up a sign saying highway service design, we're the answer to everything, come and use us. I think we need to go and solve stuff and show that it really works. And then people begin to get an appetite for it when they realize the stuff they've been trying to solve for 10, 20, 30 years can get solved. And if we can't solve it, we don't deserve to be casting glory. But I think we can. I have the faith that I know this stuff works because I've been around a long time and I know it works. So it's my job to tell everybody.
So I suppose it hooks back to that storytelling. The next thing is being
absolutely
tell effective
correct.
story.
Yeah, it's a massive believer in storytellers, because you and getting the people who used me, not me, the people who benefited, the leaders who've learned to have trust because they benefited from it, make them the advocates. And that was my policy at the Design Council 20 years ago, and that really worked. They don't want to hear me because I would say it, wouldn't I? So getting the people who have really benefited from it, who understand it. I mean, that's why I'm lucky with John Bird. He just loves design now because he's seen it actually help the big issue come up with new strategies post-COVID, post everything, digital money and all that stuff. They have to think, they were forced to think differently. And a bunch of service design students at the Royal College of Art are helping him do it. So he won't stop talking about it. That's great. A great question. Thank you. All of them have been fantastic questions. Thank you.
Great stuff. I think we have 2 more hands up. Let's make these the last 2. So great questions all. Thanks so much.
Yeah, no, fantastic.
Let me see who's next. We've got a Matt. Matt, if you want to come off mute and shout out.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the talk, Clive. It's really interesting.
Thanks,
just
Matt.
wanted to pick up on the point about about like not leaving design to designers alone, which I totally get the sentiment of that, and how it could, how it's obviously really important to do that. I guess I wanted to ask about the problem you can encounter when you do that sometimes of you kind of get input from like some of the people might giving input might not be aware of things like the need to have empathy and prototype and not just sort of jump to decisions based on their own biases. So especially, and that's obviously more difficult if those are sort of people with power and influence in the project. So just wondering how you manage that.
And this is a story I hear from so many service designers and absolutely see it and get it. I mean, I would say to my students at the Royal College of Art, you think you're being trained as designers. You're not. You're being trained as facilitators and future leaders. I mean, I don't mean CEOs. I mean to show leadership within a team, for example. And for me, it's like the essential ingredients of collaboration and the things that work for me in difficult situations. I mean, to get people together first and get them to understand the mission we're on. We talked about mission and the vision. That I find that very important. Facilitating the process in a shared and collaborative way, which can be quite agile actually, but just don't measure it by velocity of outputs. Measure it by amount of empathy. Different measurement techniques. But I do think bringing people on the journey right from the start is when I've had most success, and when I see service designers have most success. And if you start pushing it out into people who don't understand why you're doing it, you spend all your time trying to convince them about what you've already done. I think there are some key points in service design where getting people to understand you're going to start a journey and keeping them up to date. I'm a big believer in governance, actually sharing what you're doing to leaders and stuff as you go through. All these things have helped me and others to take people on that journey. But a lot of organizations are not built to do that, and there are an awful lot of cultural legacy, and we've always done it like this, and things that I know happen in government a lot. So you have to educate right at the beginning, I think, for people to go on that journey. It comes back to storytelling. It comes back to having advocates who can come in and perhaps say, look, we did this and it worked. It's not easy. I'm sorry. I said to every student, you're gonna be an evangelist and a pioneer for the whole of your life. No one's ever going to get it. You're going to have to keep talking, right, to get your right to be in the room. And unfortunately, that's how it is. But I think if you bring other people in and educate and explain, it increases your the likelihood of success. It eases the process. Was there one more, Sarah?
We've got one more from Bill. Thanks,
okay.
Matthew.
No.
Yeah.
Hello.
I'm sorry, we haven't any female questions. This is terrible. Go ahead.
Hello, hi. I'm Bill Crowson from the DWP.
Hello.
I've noticed that there is quite an interest at the moment in the spaces that exist between services as well. So kind of systems and how services connect to each other. It's becoming much more of a challenge in terms of how do we use these spaces, and the needs of the service users are extending beyond some of these silos. They've become silos almost, some of the services that we've designed. How do we connect these disparate services together, and what can we use these processes, or do you think we need to invent new design processes to do this?
I think that's really interesting. We haven't got that much time, but I'll give you, so for service design, the raw material of services are systems. You know, that's what we have to manipulate and lever and make work differently. But you're absolutely right. Two students who left the RCA are now working at Barking and Dagenham Council, for example, did a project on system silos, and they used their service design process and methodologies to stand above those systems and give them a view of how citizens were falling between the gaps of different well-designed services that weren't sharing data, that weren't. So giving those siloed systems a more holistic view of who they were serving and understanding the pain points and where exactly, as you say, those gaps were, and redesigning them to go together. The benefits of that are huge. I mean, the efficiencies that are gained are huge, and people don't fall between gaps. They have better lives because of it. So it's a very high level answer, but I think the same thing, the same processes and techniques that are designing individual services need to be applied more holistically, I think, is the answer. And systems are, of course, I think system thinking is a fantastically important thing. But we need to remember why we're redesigning the systems. And I think that comes back to design. We're making decisions about people, and we want them to experience these services in a holistic, proper way that they can benefit from. And that there's no other word to call it than design, even if we want to hide it. It is design, but it's about a more holistic, joined up way of designing. And I think that's kind of the next level of maturity. I can see lots of, certainly public sector organizations, beginning to realize they design wonderfully, but in isolation. So you raise a brilliant point, I think, Bill.
Thank you. Yeah, it was great talk. Thank you very much for your time as well.
Oh, thank you. No, pleasure and privilege. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone, for your fantastic questions. A huge thanks to Clive again for joining. Huge thanks to Maynaz for taking the lead and recording and resolving all tech issues at the beginning. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Sarah, for it must have been a stressful first few minutes when you were rushing around. I really appreciate it. And it all worked in the end.
All works out in the end. Yeah, again, huge thanks, Clive, and thanks everyone for joining.
Lovely. Good luck to you all. Hope to see you again. Cheers.
Thanks so much.
Take care, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.